Welcome in to another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host Jeff Cohen. We have a loaded episode, per usual. A lot to talk about within the farm system. It's an exciting time for White Sox fans, Jeff. It's the White Sox are playing pretty good baseball, which is something we haven't been able to say for much of this season. They're coming off a series win against Cleveland, which never happens. All in all, a good time. Some down spurs in the minor leagues. A really rough week for Birmingham. A few other teams that kind of had some up and downs this week. But generally speaking, the farm is in a good place as we continue to talk about. We've got a lot to discuss today. We had a trade that went down for a veteran flip last week. Bryan Ramos has been kind of making waves in the major league level. We've got our top left-handed starters list that is set to publish this week that we are going to discuss, as well as our normal hitter of the week, pitcher of the week, typical minor league stuff. Arizona Complex League kicked off, so we're going to dive into that as well at the end of the episode. But how are you doing, Jeff?
Doing good, Elijah. And would love to start with Bryan Ramos. I know you're a big fan of his,
Sure.
and I guess Danny Mendick is set to come off the IL any day now. So just curious what you
Yeah.
see is for Ramos's future in Chicago.
I'm curious too. I think, it was great to see him kind of get off to a hot start. He was someone who, again, this is a guy that I really believe in the talent, but we have to remember, right? Like, he hasn't been above double A. He started the season really struggling in double A in Birmingham, right? So this is someone who basically got called up in the midst of his initial kind of breakout of the season, right? He was his first good week of the season in Birmingham, then he gets called up following that week. So a little bit of a crazy transition for Ramos, to be honest. But then he comes up to the White Sox, and in his first, what was it? His first five starts, he had, let's see, his first five starts, he had 7 hits. So it's not, lighting the world on fire, right? But comparatively to most of the players on the White Sox roster, it's like, oh, this guy can hit a little bit, right? Like, that's something that we are excited to see, and it's cool to see. And a 267 batting average at the big leagues now in his first week and a half of games, right? It hasn't been great his last few games. Slowed down a little bit after kind of a really hot streak to start. Went 0 for 4 in 2 straight games, and then 1 for 4 yesterday, right? So only 1 hit this weekend in 3 games. So he kind of has slowed down a little bit, come back down to earth. It's really just going to be a question of is it worth keeping him up? Has he been good enough to merit staying up? I would love to see him stay up just because it's just that life of energy. But personally, I'm also not going to be upset if he goes down to Charlotte. At this point, I don't really see what it does putting him back in Birmingham when he's already tasted the big leagues. He's shown that he's borderline ready. He might not be fully ready for a big league job, right? But I would put him in Charlotte if you're going to send him down as opposed to going back to Birmingham, just because I think he's kind of ready for that at this point, given what he's done in the last week and what he did at the end of his time in Birmingham. What do you think? I'm not sure exactly. I don't think I have a firm opinion quite yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide myself what is best for his development. But I think bottom line is if he continues to show that he can hit in the major leagues, I can't see any reason to send him back down. If he struggles, okay, send him to Charlotte. I think when Mendick comes back, the easy solution is to send Remillard back to Charlotte,
Yeah.
keep Ramos on the roster, at least buy him some couple more
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah, I think the biggest tell for me with Ramos, and the biggest reason why I would be okay with keeping him up, like I said, I'm not opposed to him going back down because he is still really young and he doesn't have a ton of experience. He doesn't have any experience in AAA, right? But one of the biggest things that stands out to me is 3 strikeouts, Jeff, in 30 at bats now, which is not. I mean, this is a guy who struck out a pretty good amount in Birmingham. Even when he was performing well last season, he was still he decently manages his strikeouts, right? He's not a super high strikeout guy. But 3 strikeouts and 30 at bats is really impressive. And this is a guy who's having good at bats. Like, it's not, he doesn't look overpowered. And a lot of young guys come up and they look overpowered. He looks like he's having at bats that are major league at bats, which is a great sign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So,
speaking of the Major League Club, they had their first trade during the
yeah.
season. What'd you think about that?
Yeah, so Robbie Grossman, a veteran deal, right? Signed right before the season, kind of just minor league deal with an invite. Like, the assumption was always he would be with the big league team, but signed for nothing essentially. Returns relief pitching prospect. Bear with me here. I'm going to try the name.
Ooh.
Anthony Huopi Tuio Nitoa. I believe that's right. We'll see if that's exactly right. But that is the relief pitcher prospect that was acquired in exchange for Robbie Grossman. So that's interesting because he is someone who, Robbie Grossman was signed to fill a spot, right? Like, at the end of the day, Robbie Grossman was signed to be a veteran, to be fill a roster spot as an outfielder who's competent, and then you see what happens from there. I expect a lot of those types of signings, Tommy Pham, all these other types of guys, right? Chris Flexen to be flipped at the deadline. But Grossman, the Rangers had a bunch of injuries, and they're familiar with him, and they like him there, and they said, hey, we want to get this guy back because we needed to fill a spot. And the White Sox turned him into a decent pitching prospect, right? Like, it's not a starting pitcher. AHT is someone who he has never been a starter. He's a reliever right now at this point in his career. That's fine, right? Like, it's solid relief pitching prospect for a guy who really was signed for nothing, right? I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Our colleague, James Fox, on his latest podcast said that this reliever, and that's an 80 grade effort trying to pronounce his name, that the reliever was going to be the pitcher of the month for the Rangers. So it's not like, they got some stiff. This guy's got
exactly.
a nice upside.
Yeah, his first, in 10 games with the Rangers organization, he's only pitched once since coming over to the Sox. And in 10 games with the Rangers this season, though, 12 and a third innings, only 7 hits allowed, 4 walks, and 16 strikeouts, Jeff. So this is a guy who is in Double-A, has been a really good relief pitcher this year. So, and 23 years old, not super old, late round draft pick from out of way back in 2019. But this is someone who, like, if he makes a handful of big league appearances out of the bullpen in 2025 and is a solid reliever, that's already a massive win in terms of a trade for a guy for Robbie Grossman, who really means nothing to the organization ultimately.
Right.
So
this organization cannot win many games, but they can win trades.
They've been winning trades. That's the thing. Yeah. That's part of why this farm system is where it is, and what we say every week is like this. They've been winning trades for the last few years, and there's been some good pieces added. And this is another one where it's like you capitalize on a needy team that needs a player, and you turn a veteran into something. That's what I hope the entire deadline looks like. The next 2 months, 3 months, like any pitcher who's throwing, any player really, veteran player who's playing well on a short-term deal, right? Flip them, see what you can get. You take a prospect, you take a flyer. Even if it's a prospect that doesn't pan out, you're in a situation where you can afford to take some chances on prospects, and you should be right now, given the state of the team. So great trade, in my opinion. Happy to see Ramos in the big leagues. That, I think, is all we really have to touch on the big league team. Things have been good, though. I mean, generally speaking, it's the team is. There's some energy. There's some vibes. There's some energy. There's some players playing better than they were earlier in the year, and that's great to see right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the minor leagues, I think last week you shared with us your top 10 right-handed pitchers, and today you've got your top left-handed pitchers. Is that right?
I do, yes. And this is a collaborative article that I wrote with my guy Dylan Barnas, who has recently joined the FutureSox team. He's a super, super smart guy. Everybody should check him out on Twitter at NotCease. Dylan is his name, so that's a little play on words there for Dylan Cease. But he's a great writer, knows what he's doing. So me and him kind of talked through this list. We were like, oh, there's really not a ton of lefties, but there's definitely some good ones. So we broke down this list, and then we split up the write-ups on it. Obviously, Noah Schultz comes in at number 1. This is left-handed starting pitchers for everybody who's listening. So you can go back last week, like Jeff mentioned, and listen to right-handed starting pitchers, which is a super deep group. The left-handed side is a little less deep, but still some really fun arms to keep an eye on, Jeff. Number 1 is Noah Schultz. I think that's a given, right? The number 1 pitching prospect in the system. At his best, Noah Schultz. I said it this week when I watched his start. When he's at his best, Noah Schultz looks like, could be an elite starting pitcher type of guy, right? We've been saying that for a while, but like, he's truly special. Having a guy who throws 98, he touched 99 this week, by the way, in Winston. I saw a report about that the gun at Winston had a few 99 reads on Schultz this week. So a guy that touches 99 with movement from that arm angle, it is just something incredibly special. And like you've said before, one of the best sliders you will ever see. So pairing, he's just a really special pitcher. Obviously, he was number 1 on this list. There really wasn't any question. 2 and 3 was an interesting spot because 2 guys both acquired last year, 2 guys both, older for the Double-A level, both been through some injuries, really struggled last year, but both have looked a lot better this year. At number 2, we had Jake Eder, and then at number 3, we had Kai Busch. Before I go further, Jeff, Kai Busch has been better this year, which is interesting because he's definitely less high of an upside guy in comparison to a Jake Eder. But I also really like things I've seen from Eder this year. Eder has really turned a corner, in my opinion, with his stuff. The stuff is playing. It's going to come down to command still, right? Like, he still is not commanding the way he wants to be, But I really like Jake Eder's stuff right now. It's more lively than it was last year. It's moving. It's sharper. The slider looks better for sure. And I think he is taking a step forward. And then Bush, on the other hand, has also looked a lot better. Bush, still someone who struggles with command, but Bush is racking up strikeouts right now. He's minimizing runs. He's not really giving up a ton of big innings like he did last year at times. So good stuff from both of them. What do you think about Eder at 2 and then Bush at 3?
Yeah, I think it could go either way. You can flip flop them, and not. I wouldn't argue a bit, but yeah, they're definitely 2 and 3. And last year when the Sox acquired them, they kind of underwhelmed when they got to Birmingham, and people thought, well, was that really such a great deal? But we're seeing now that they're starting to reach their potential, and there is a big upside for both of them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's hard, and it was last year. It was easy to kind of write these guys off, and there's a reason that they're still the second and third ranked guys in terms of left-handed pitchers, because they both have a lot of talent, and they've both shown it this year. One thing I want to point out with Eder real quick. So Eder, has given up more contact than Bush, generally speaking, but the strikeout rate is high. It's over 11 Ks per nine. The walk rate is down a lot from last year. When he came over to Birmingham last year, he had a walk rate of over 7 walks per 9 innings pitched. And then this year, it has just a little over 3 walks per 9 innings pitched. So the walks are down. The strikeouts are just as high, if not higher, than they were parts of last year. And then the interesting thing with Eder, a 4.6 ERA, Jeff, but a 2.18 FIP. FIP, for those who don't know, is fielding independent pitching. So it's just an estimator. It's a different version of ERA that essentially estimates and normalizes pitching without accounting for any fielding factors. It also kind of minimizes some of the expectation. It's a little bit more of an expected stat than it is with ERA, which is just a literal earned runs averaged, right? So Eder having a FIP that low, it tells me 2 things, right? First of all, it tells me the stuff is good. It tells me the stuff is playing, and he's getting a lot of whiffs and a lot of chases too. It also tells me that some of these balls in play and some of these runs he's given up, right? He's given up a good amount of runs this season. Have probably been kind of unlucky, to be honest. 15 runs allowed in 29 and a third innings. It's some of those runs, I'm not saying all of them, right? He hasn't been perfect and he's missed some spots, but some of those runs have probably been a little bit more lucky than they have been, a tell of him making mistakes, right? So
Yeah.
I think Eder has looked really good. That when I've watched him and, watched him directly, when I've watched those few games he's pitched, I see a guy who looks healthy and a guy who looks ready to take a step forward compared to last year. And Bush has been the same way. Bush has been really steady too. But Bush's results have been great as well. So 2 guys that are already doing what we hoped they would do this year, which is bounce back, look healthy, and start to improve upon last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So your first 3 picks are pretty much chalk, but I'm really curious about the next couple.
So this is where Dylan and I went back and forth on this one a little bit. We were just having a discussion about it. And the next 2 are both guys drafted last year, 2023 draft picks. And I almost wanted to put the 5th one at 4, but I have to go with the upside here just because they're both so kind of early in their careers and haven't had the time to really fully establish, right? We went with Christian Opper at 4 and then Lucas Gordon at 5. Gordon has been really impressive so far this season, which almost made me want to go Gordon at that 3 spot, or at the 4 spot, pardon me. But I can't resist the intrigue of Opper. I think I haven't got to see Opper pitch much, so I really don't have a personal gauge that much. I've watched a little bit of tape, but I haven't seen him pitch like live before, or just even on TV, right? He's in the ACL right now. But Opper is someone who it's exciting, right? He's young. He's got a lot of arm talent. It's whippy. It's kind of that, that upside lefty, right? Where you can see some velo, you can see some movement. There's just a lot to like there, and a lot of intrigue. While Gordon, the total opposite side of the spectrum, right? Experienced college guy. He played at Texas. He played Big 12 baseball. He played against what he's facing right now in Kannapolis is probably worse than what he faced in large parts of his college career, right? So that's not to discredit his results at all, because he's been excellent so far this season. He's been the best pitcher, second best pitcher in Canny, behind Aldrin Batista probably. But this is a guy who's been really good all year. The command is a little bit spotty, but he's getting whiffs. He's not letting up really any big hits here and there, and he's been good. I went Opper. We went Opper. I almost wanted to go Gordon. It was a tough call, but I went with the guy who was drafted a round earlier.
Yeah. I'm just looking at Lucas Gordon's last 30 days. 2.88 ERA, batting average against 191,
Yeah.
Yeah, really
He's
solid.
he's been phenomenal. So it
Yep.
really was hard to put him at 5. Opper also made his debut this week, so that was worth noting. Opper made his debut for the Complex League. He threw 3 innings of no run ball with no one hit allowed and 4 strikeouts. So 3 innings, no runs, 1 hit, 4 strikeouts. Pretty good stuff from Opper as well. So hard to get video from the ACL, so I didn't even get to see any clips of that. But at the same time, right, like that's a guy. He's got some arm talent. We know he's got some arm talent. That's a given. So I'm really excited to see him in the ACL, and I hope he ends up making his way to Canny by the end of the season. I think he'll spend most of the year, if not all of it, in the ACL. He is only 19 right now, still a junior college guy, so super young. But I think Opper is the upside pick, and Gordon is someone who, at his age and his experience, like should rise quickly, right? Like we expect Gordon to be in Winston this season. I would expect him to be in Birmingham by next season. Like he's going to breeze through Kannapolis because he's experienced. He pitched in college for years. He's a talented guy. He's been great there so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I am trying to remember right now who the next one on the list is, because the list rounds out. We only had 6 full pitchers on the list. So the last one on the list was Tyler Schweitzer, who is another guy that you could make a case for him just given his experience and his resume over either of those two guys potentially, because he has been really good. Schweitzer is off to a rough start this season, but in his last start this past week looked really good. So cool stuff from him, and he comes in at number 6 as kind of another high floor guy. He mixes and matches. He's more of a command guy than a stuff guy, but he's good. He looked good last year in his first full kind of extended season, and then he continued to show some signs this year. And in his last start was his best of the season.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's a good
then the other
list.
guy,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a lot of upside arms.
Yeah, for sure. And then we had an honorable mention for Shane Murphy as well, who's not currently a starter. He's pitching out of the bullpen as kind of the sixth man, the long reliever in Winston right now. But Murphy was a starter last year, a late round pick in 2022, someone that looked really good for most of last season. And I think depending on injuries and promotions, could work his way back into a rotation later this season, but has also been good out of the bullpen since coming off of an injury to start the year.
Yeah, and he's been excellent so far this year. I think he's only thrown 6 innings, but I think they've all been perfect, near perfect.
Yeah, so he looks good as well. And not as deep of a list as the right-handers, right? But that's 7 guys that are in the system that are some solid pitchers, and headlined by, the top pitcher in the system, and a handful of other guys that we really think could be big leaguers in the future. So, it highlights even more of that pitching depth that we keep talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
So now we will dive into our hitter and pitcher of the week, as we always do. These segments, we're going to kind of make them a little bit more expansive this week. We'll start on the hitting side, where I want to highlight one hitter particularly, but then we're going to just highlight the whole lineup that he's a part of right now, because that whole lineup had a heck of a week. Ryan Galanie is the hitter of the week, and really just one of the hitters of the season. If you think about season stats, from a perspective of what across the organization, I'm not sure there's been many hitters that have been consistently better than what Ryan Galanie has done since missing the first week of the season with an injury. This past week, Galanie went 10 for 24 with a double, a homer, and 5 walks as well. So he got on base at over a 500 clip, or about a 500 clip, that he was getting on base this week, and just continues to be a steady presence in that Kannapolis lineup. 21 games this year, he's got an OPS of 964, Jeff. He's getting on base at a 430 clip due to a bunch of just consistent contact. This is a guy who just hits the ball, and he just looks like a pro hitter every time I watch him hit.
Yeah, I was looking at his stats for the last week, the last month. Looking at for the entire year, he's got 10 extra base hits. He's 8 walks to 18 strikeouts. That's phenomenal for a power bat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's off to a terrific start. And I'll tell you a quick story about Galanie. I did have a chance to talk to him. Nice guy. One of the games I went to, he hit a monster home run. I mean,
Yeah.
the left fielder didn't move. It was one of those shots. It was a big 3-run homer, like the key hit in the game. And then after the game, I went downstairs to wait for the starting pitcher to come out, and I was just kind of hanging out. And I look and I see some guy in the batting cage all by himself hitting off a tee, and it's Galanie. Soon as the game ends, he goes into the cage to work on something. I was
Very
really
cool.
impressed by that.
That is very cool. I got to talk to him last year and did an interview with him in the fall. He's a great dude. You can tell he just is kind of just head down, and he just plays baseball, and he knows what he's doing, and he's focused and he's locked in. And that brings us to kind of the whole team in Canny, right? I just there I wanted to this is the hitter of the week, right? It goes to Galanie, but we want to talk about the whole Canny lineup here because as long as we're getting into Galanie, we got to talk about just that draft class. Jeff has been really good off the bat, and I think there is something to be said for right, like it is single A. A lot of these college guys have faced hit pitchers that are just as good, if not better, right? But at the same time, like results are results. And this lineup in Candy was great this week. I'm just realizing now I forgot to do records at the beginning of the episode, but Candy had a good week. Generally speaking, most other teams in the organization didn't have a great week, but Candy did have a really good week. And part of that's this lineup, right? This core of Galanie and Nishida and Connor and Park that are all these 2023 draft picks have looked great so far this season. And the top of that order, because of those guys, was just hot all week.
Yeah, those are the top four hitters in the lineup. You've got Nishida leading off. God, his stats are just insane. His stats are insane. For the season, 28 walks to 17 strikeouts. That's mind-blowing, right?
Yeah,
This is the guy at the top of your lineup. I mean, just driving opposing pitchers crazy. Then you follow up. I think ththey've got
Galanie
hitting second, Connor third, and then for whatever reason, Eddie Park fourth. And he may not be the power hitter, but he's off to a great start after coming back from an injury, coming back from a pretty serious hamate surgery injury, but it hasn't phased him at all. I mean, he's doing terrific.
Great stuff from that whole lineup. I just did an interview with Caden Connor that'll be out soon, so everybody should go give that a listen. He's a guy who 19th rounder, right? Minimal pedigree, but someone who's working hard, has looked really good in the plate all season, and definitely has the right mindset with him. Like you said, Park's been great, Nishida's been great, Glaney's been great. That whole lineup was excellent this week. Really just impressive stuff from Kannapolis. I think it'll be more telling once we see some of those guys get to the next level. I think it's going to be interesting to watch as we kind of work our way up, just where those guys get to and kind of how they progress. And when you get to Winston and Birmingham, then what do those college hitters look like? Because that's the real test. And we saw that with, a guy like Tim Elko last year, where he was just completely dominant in Kannapolis, and then same thing with Winston even, and then made his way to Birmingham and started to see some struggles, right? So it does get harder, obviously, as you go up the levels. So I'm curious to see where things go kind of later in the year, but at the same time, that Canny lineup has been excellent to start this season, and especially in the past week or two. So we're excited there. Flipping over to the pitching side of things, Jeff, our pitcher of the week, this was a hard one for me because I really wanted to pick like three dudes all in the same rotation. So much like we just kind of made the Candy lineup, the hitter of the week lineup, the lineup of the week even, I'm going to start with one pitcher, and then we're just going to dive into the whole rotation. Juan Carela gets the nod this week for pitcher of the week. Juan Carela is someone who I was super high on last year, and then to start this season, it was like, his command has just not been there. What is the next step for Carela, right? Because this guy's 22. He was in high A for pretty much all of last year, right? So when does that kind of transition? Like, when does he need to kind of show a little bit more? Since his first games of the season, I think his first two games of the season, Carela he didn't get out of the third inning. The command wasn't there. Since those games, he has been excellent. This past week was his best start of the season, all things considered. Went 6 innings, 2 hits, no runs, and 6 strikeouts for Carela. So another great start, but that's coming off of a start before that where he went 1 hit, 5 strikeouts, no runs. And then the one before that, he gave up 3 runs, but the one before that was another 1 hit, no runs, 4 strikeouts. So 3 of his last 4 starts have been shutouts. He has turned a corner. He really has. After walking, 7 guys in his first 2 appearances of the season, only 5 walks in his next 4. So the command looks better. And when Juan Carela is commanding, he's able to limit contact. He even in the games he gave up a bunch of runs early in the season, right? It wasn't a ton of hard contact. He really hasn't allowed much hard contact at all this season. It's just been walks. And now when he's able to command, he's a really good pitcher.
Yeah. And no surprise, we saw signs of this last year. But he's been excellent. But that whole Winston staff has been excellent. Who had the best game? Who had the best start last week? Probably Riley Gowens, the guy people know least about. But he went 7 innings, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts.
Yep, I almost picked him too because I was torn between the two. But it's like like I said originally, right? This rotation was excellent this week. Riley Gowens, 10 strikeouts is amazing. Like we mentioned earlier, Tyler Schweitzer with his best start of the season by far. He went 6 clean innings. Noah Schultz had a really solid start where I mentioned this online the other day. Noah Schultz's stats this week were not kind of exactly at the level of Carela, Schweitzer, or Gowens, but Noah Schultz was really good this week too. He really flashed some excellent stuff. So, really, really good week all around from that rotation in Winston. And we talk about it every week, Jeff. The pitching depth is just apparent every single week in this farm system.
Yeah. And I'll say something about the staff in Kannapolis and the staff in Winston. And on both teams, starters are going 5, 6, 7 innings, and they're keeping their teams in games. And after watching Charlotte for the last couple of years, where after the third inning the team is down 7-1, these starters are keeping their teams in games every game. Every
Yeah.
game. It's so rare that they. I can't remember one guy getting knocked out maybe before the fourth inning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's impressive. I think Paulette had a rough start this week, coming off his best start the week before, though. So a little bit of inconsistency still from Peyton Paulette. We'd like to see that tick up a little. But like we said, this whole rotation has been really fun to watch. Noah Schultz has a whip of .90 right now. Riley Gowens, after a 10 strikeout game, has a .99 whip. Carela, despite 2 games where he was walking everybody, is down to a .03 whip. So those are, it's just really, really impressive numbers all around from that rotation. It's good to see Schweitzer get back on track this week, and I'm excited to kind of see each of these guys progress. Like you said, Gowens is a guy that, he's the 6th guy in this rotation. He entered the season as he was a flyer kind of in that Aaron Bummer trade. He was kind of this question mark piece that was added back with a bunch of big leaguers. And he looks really good. He's had a few starts where it's been like, whoa, this guy has some serious stuff working for him. So it's cool to watch this rotation develop, and it's great to see all of them at different points having really impressive starts.
So, Elijah, I've got a question for you while we're talking about all these talented players in Kannapolis and Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
A lot of them, like the first 4 hitters in that Canny lineup that we were talking about, Nishida, Connor, Galanie, and Park, they're all college bats. They're all looking really strong. And as we know, for a lot of them, the competition was better in college than it is in low A. So I'm curious, when is the time? How soon can they be promoted to Winston? And again, it's that same log jam we've been talking about all season. You can't promote them to Winston until you promote some of those guys to Birmingham. And so there's a log jam in the system, but yet I think sooner than later, they need to be promoted along with some of the pitchers like Batista. I think all these guys need to move up. And
no, I completely agree. Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, we have a new head of player development in Paul Janish. We don't really know what he's going to do. But last year, it seemed like June was the time for the first wave of promotions from Kannapolis to Winston. But I'm just curious what you think about when they need to be promoted, and who needs to get promoted in Winston. When do we think about moving Noah Schultz to Birmingham, just so he faces better competition, even though he's on a strict innings and pitch count?
Yeah, it's tricky. The one question is like, can Noah Schultz pitch in Birmingham successfully? And I think that's a resounding yes. I think he could go to Birmingham today and have some pretty good starts there because he's that talented. The other question is, do you feel comfortable with Noah Schultz at less than 50 innings in his professional career going anywhere beyond Winston? And the answer to that is probably no. So it's a really tricky balance. I would like to see him there later in the year, but I also think he's only throwing 4 innings right now, typically in a start. So I don't know if 4 innings of Noah Schultz is worth putting at that level just yet. I would like to see it, but because of his age and because of his lack of experience and lack of innings still, I kind of lean towards some of those other guys in Winston, even if they're not quite as talented as Schultz, being promoted before him. So I think it's going to be a tricky kind of middle ground to figure out. I could see Schultz maybe August. I don't see any time before August. I'm not sure I can really see any time pre-deadline him being promoted. I just think they want to be really cautious with his innings and really cautious with his arm right now. Would I want to see him in Birmingham? For sure, because that team is awesome, and him pitching with that team would just be incredibly fun to watch. But I don't think it happens. There's a chance it doesn't happen this season at all, to be honest with you, just because of the innings under his arm. But if it does happen, which I hope it does, I don't think it's till the last month or two of the minor league season.
And I get that. I know it's all
Yeah,
about innings and building up,
right.
building up his innings and his number of pitches. But I mean, he's too good for high A. These guys,
He is
I mean, what did you say his whip was?
0.9,
0.88? Yeah,
0.9, but that's 0.9 with him like struggling in one start too. So it should be like
right.
0.8 something probably. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tricky. The thing, so I pointed this out the other day on a long Twitter thread that I did. The Winston promotion is the tricky one. I think every other level has clear promotions where you could kind of clear that logjam, right? Nastrini going to the bigs makes all the sense in the world. I'm ready for it again. Like whatever, Drew Thorpe has nothing to prove in Double-A. He had his worst start of the season yesterday, and I really don't care. He didn't even make it out the first inning. He got pulled in with 35 pitches in the first inning yesterday, and instead of trying to let him work through the inning, they just said, nope, calling it today. I don't care. I still think he's ready to be in AAA, if not the big leagues already, right? So those are clear kind of pieces to move. I think soon enough, you're going to look at Kai Busch and even potentially Mason Adams as pieces that could also move up as well in Birmingham. In Canny, like we said, Aldrin Batista, way too good to be in Kannapolis. On the interview I just did with Caden Connor, I mentioned Batista's name, and he goes, yeah, that stuff is ridiculous. And he was just, it was very, like, he's too good. Lucas Gordon as well is too experienced and has been too consistent to be in Kannapolis. Both those guys, I think, are pretty easy promotion candidates. But then Winston, it's a little trickier because, like you said, Schultz is the talent-based. Schultz is the one, right? Experience-based, Paulette would be the one, maybe even Schweitzer. Both of them have struggled out the gate this year, though. So you can't really promote Paulette and Schweitzer quite yet because of their struggle this year. Schultz is a little bit too young, and they're being a little bit too cautious, I think, right now for him to be promoted. So then you're looking at, I don't think Gowens, I think he's too new to the organization. He's still young. I guess maybe Carela. Is Carela the option there? Because he did spend all of last year in high A. So I think after his first two starts, Carela's looked a lot better. I think Carela might be the first one at 22 years old. I think he could go to Birmingham. The other thing you could consider is putting Connor McCullough back in the Birmingham rotation because he's pitching out of the pen there, putting him into the rotation or even a Shane Murphy coming from Winston too. But then it's like you still have to clear a spot in the Winston rotation if you're bringing up a Batista or a Gordon, right? Both those guys really should be up ASAP, but I don't know how you're clearing two spots in that Winston rotation just yet.
Yeah, that's tricky. What about on the hitting side? Again, all those Kannapolis college bats need to be in Winston sooner than later. Do you think?
I mean, Jacob Gonzalez. That's my answer. I don't. It sounds aggressive, and it probably is aggressive, but Jacob Gonzalez is a totally different player right now than what we saw last year. He's made a lot of adjustments, and he looks like he could handle Double-A right now, honestly. So I wouldn't mind Jacob Gonzalez reaching the Double-A level, and that opens up a spot. I think probably Galanie is the first one to make his way to Winston of that group. I think just because he's a year older. I think he has a year on both Nishida and maybe Connors. I think Connors the same age as Galanie. I think, but they're similar age. But I think Galanie's probably the first one to move up. Maybe Park. I could see that too because Eddie Park is probably the highest draft pedigree, but he also was hurt to start the season, like you said. So I think Galanie's probably the first one. I'm trying to think of. I think you can kind of do that without promoting anybody. If you want to promote a Jacob Gonzalez, sure, but I think you could also put Galanie in Winston and find innings for him at first, at third, at DH, and he would be able to get innings there as well. But it's probably going to be a June thing, a June-July thing. I don't think anything significant is going to happen in May. I would like to see some promotions, but it probably is a month and a half out, I think.
And it's interesting, another issue is maybe a guy's young and he hasn't had as many at bats as you'd like him to have, but he dominates every level he's in. He demonstrates he can handle every level he's in. How fast do you move a guy through the system? Do you let him get to Charlotte when he's 22?
Yeah, right. It's hard because you want to promote guys, but at the same time, you don't want to rush them and you don't want to put them in positions to not succeed. So like, for instance, Winston, right? If you look at trying to get some of those Canny guys up to Winston, if you're looking at production, I would look at Wes Kath, right? You can look at Wes Kath and say, this guy's raking. But at the same time, Wes Kath has really struggled for 2 years in a row, 2 full seasons, and this is his first taste of success. I don't want to stunt that success or cause any potential drop off in his confidence and his swing right now when he's finally finding a groove for the first time in 2 years, right? So it's like there's that balance. You want to get guys promoted because you want them to succeed. And if they're succeeding, you want to keep rewarding them with promotions. But you don't want to stunt guys and push into situations that are even harder than what they're in right now when they're doing well. So
Right.
it's a really hard give and take. I think maybe Sean Gusenberg is the one that seems like he could be promoted just because he's older. He has plenty of experience in Winston. I could see Gusenberg being the first promotion from that core in Winston-Salem. But soon enough, you're going to have to move some guys, and it's going to become at each level, they're going to start shifting because there is depth right now. So when one guy shifts from Canny to Winston, Winston to Birmingham, the next guy goes Birmingham to Charlotte, the next guy goes Charlotte to Chicago, right? Like it's going to be a chain reaction that we see in the middle to second half of the season for sure.
And this is probably a good time to talk about what's going on in Arizona, because that's also going to trigger promotion. Some of those guys
That
eventually are going to come to Kannapolis,
100%.
and maybe sooner than later.
Yeah, exactly. We are going totally off order today, but that is okay. And I hope everybody understands because we're just kind of bouncing around and talking White Sox baseball, right? And that's what we're here to do, is to talk about prospects. It doesn't have to always be in the same formula. So we are doing it our own way today. Let me try and pull up these stats real quick for the ACL, because so far the White Sox Arizona Complex League is 2-3 in their first few games. But in general, there has been some really exciting performances from certain players so far in the Complex League. We mentioned Christian Opper earlier, who made his debut. Grant Taylor made his debut. Not a great debut, but a solid one. Definitely go to FutureSox.net and check out James Fox's article. He talked with Taylor. He got a little bit of insight in what Grant Taylor is up to. Another super exciting pitcher who is going to be in Canny sooner than later, right? Another guy, it's like that trickle effect, right? Grant Taylor is a second-round draft pick. He's coming off of Tommy John, but he's super talented, and sooner than later, he's going to need to be in Canny and in the rotation in Canny. So then you got to move somebody out of the rotation. Whether they go to the bullpen or whether they go up to Winston is to be seen, right? But you got to keep moving guys because they're going to need promotions, right? So I'm going to try and pull up these stats, but first I want to tell you, just in terms of the ACL, right? Ryan Burroughs. I know that you're big on Ryan Burroughs. Tell me a little bit about him and kind of, he's dominating right now. He has been phenomenal in the ACL. He'll be in Candy soon. It's just because he got a late start with an injury this season. But what do you expect from Ryan Burroughs this season?
Well, his calling card, as I understand it, is bat to ball skills, and there's nothing that's going on in Arizona that would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. He's been really, really solid. I've been impressed with what I've seen from him so far. He's just got I'm trying to find these stats for this, but he has been great so far. And then two of the younger, really interesting prospects that we kind of have our eye on with FutureSox, right, is George Walkout. That's my guy. He's great. He skipped his last year of high school. I reminded somebody this online the other day. Like, George could be playing high school baseball right now. He could be he could be dominating in Illinois high school baseball right now. And he's at the ACL, and this weekend he had a 4-for-5 game with 2 doubles, both smacked. He had a home run last week. One of the first ACL games, he had a home run I saw somebody online that said had to be 400 plus. That ball was demolished. So Walkout has looked good, right? High strikeout rate, but has looked really, really solid. Already with an OPS over 1,000 in his first 20 at bats of ACL games. Ryan Burroughs, like I was just mentioning, 474, Jeff, batting average. He's just too talented to be in the ACL still. He was in the ACL last year, right? And had some ups and downs last year, but it was kind of like after a whole season playing in the complex, he should be in Kannapolis very soon. Again, it's more of a logjam. You got to bring somebody, when somebody goes to Kannapolis, you got to bring somebody up to Winston, but Burroughs should be in Kannapolis very soon. And then Javier McGonagall is another one that we want to mention. He is a big-time international prospect. He will probably spend the majority, if not the whole season, in the Arizona Complex League because he's just coming over from the Dominican League last year. But in the Dominican League last year, he was exceptional, off to a little bit of a slow start in the ACL, but is showing his approach. He has 6 walks already in 5 games. He's definitely known for some of that approach. So some really exciting players in the Arizona Complex League, and guys that, sooner than later, we're hoping to get to see them in Kannapolis, right?
Yeah, can't wait. Can't wait.
So it's going to be really exciting. The ACL's got a lot to monitor there. We're as long as we're out of order, I want to go backtrack the levels a little bit. Not that it matters too much, but I want to touch briefly on Charlotte because we kind of glossed over Charlotte a little bit. Nick Nastrini, like I was saying, the last 2 weeks has been great. 2 starts in a row with at least 6 innings pitched, 1 run in each game. He looked good. Yeah, I think the beginning of the season was rough, right? April, when you're starting Charlotte, you're sick, then you go to Chicago, make 2 starts, go back down to Charlotte, make a start and really struggle. It was a lot of up and down, but he's settling in Charlotte. He's looking like the pitcher that we know he can be. I think that, once a rotation spot opens in Chicago, whatever that means, it will be Nastrini's. It's just a matter of time and place and when, and managing his innings as well, which is important. But you can say you're managing his innings, but if he's throwing over 6 innings in Charlotte every week, then it really doesn't matter where he's throwing it, whether it's Chicago or Charlotte, right? So Nastrini's been good. And then what about Colson Montgomery, Jeff? We've seen some good stuff from him, huh?
Yeah, he got off to a slow start, but he has really picked it up. And again, I looked at the last 2 series, the last 15 days. He hitting 262, but 404 on base percentage, 595 slugging. And then typical of Colson, that great plate discipline, 9 walks to just 11 strikeouts. And, he's getting into his power. He's got 7 extra base hits, including 3 home runs. That's in 2 weeks. So this is looking a lot more like the Colson Montgomery we expected.
Yeah, and the walks are ticking up, right? That's what you just mentioned. Like the plate approach looked better. It's the strikeouts were early in the season, but it's like, again, the power is coming, and that's part of what I think he's emphasizing right now is tapping into that power and finding more impact. And we're starting to see that impact. And then if you compare that impact with his normal plate approach and his normal ability to walk and work counts like he always does, like he's done in the last week, then you're looking at a player who is going to get on base, and he's going to add impact with some home runs and some big doubles and such, right? So he's exceptionally talented. We know that. That's a given. It was only a matter of time before we started to see some of those results, and the past few weeks has been those results, right? And we're excited to see him keep rising. Like I've said before, though, I still don't think him doing well right now means anything for the trajectory, right? I still think he should be in Charlotte for the heavy majority of this season. Anytime before the deadline would just be unnecessary, in my opinion, and I don't really think it's worth it. I think you want him to get fully comfortable hit against AAA pitching before you even consider bringing him up to the big league level.
Absolutely agree. Charlotte is back home this week, and I haven't talked to Colson since opening day. I just thought, what? Let me leave him alone. I'm not going to talk to him every week. Let him do his thing. But now we've got, a nice small sample size, well over 100 at bats. I think it's, this week's a good time to check in with him, especially after the last 2 weeks that he's had. So hopefully next week I'll have some of that conversation to share with you.
We look forward to that for sure. Everybody make sure you're following Jeff at AAA Jeff for all the interviews he does. You've got Charlotte home this week. I know Kenny's also home this week, as well as Birmingham. I know you don't go to, obviously you are not in Birmingham, but 3 teams home this week. Should be some good series for sure. We are looking forward to continuing to keep track of everything going on in the minor leagues. Thank you for bearing with us today, everybody listening, with the little bit of sporadicness with our normal order being off a little bit. But we wanted to touch on a lot of different things, and there's a lot of fun players worth mentioning. Anybody else you got on the top of your head, Jeff, that you want to touch on briefly?
I have a trivia question for you before we get out of here.
Let's do it.
I want you to tell me who this is. He's a pitcher in the Pacific Coast League. He's made 8 starts this year, 40 innings, 33 hits, 22 walks, 41 strikeouts, but a 206 batting average against. Do you have any idea who that is?
PCL. Let's see. Huh.
And if
Veteran pitcher or a prospect?
Prospect. Involved in a trade right before the start of the season.
Oh, that sounds like Christian Mena.
That's exactly who it is. Your guy.
Ah, interesting. Read me those numbers again.
So 8 starts, 40 innings, only 33 hits to 41 strikeouts, 206 batting average against. But the 2 negative numbers, 6 home runs and 22 walks.
That sounds about right. That's I mean, I like Mena. I was sad about the trade for sure, but it sounds about right. I think that's about what I expect from him. The command is still a work in progress, right? But 21 years old. I mean, he's super young still, and unfortunately, right? Like it's not like Dominic Fletcher's doing anything. So we'll see, right? But the command is iffy, but Mena can pitch. He definitely can pitch. He knows how to work counts. He knows how to create whiff. He limits batting average. He limits contact pretty well. So I'm curious to see where his career takes him. I definitely miss watching him, but like we've said, the pitching depth is pretty strong right now. So I'm not really worried about the pitching depth. I think ultimately the Sox, the next step is filling out the hitting depth in the organization and targeting hitters in the draft and via trades and all these other situations, right?
And you mentioned Dominic Fletcher. This is a guy who I think, off the top of my head, I think he had like 100 at bats and he hit 300 in the major leagues last year.
Yeah,
I mean,
he did.
he looked terrific, and he is just struggling big time. I think he hit 216 in the last 2 weeks. So I don't know what's going on there, but still plenty of season to go. And the other guy who's off to a slow start is Zach DeLoach, the other prospect that came in fairly highly regarded, and no homers, only 4 extra base hits in the last 2 weeks. And he was supposed to be a big power bat, and may prove to be.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. So interesting early returns on those trades so far. Definitely haven't looked the best so far, those late season trades. Like we said, though, weirdly enough, Riley Gowens might end up being one of the better acquisitions from all those late offseason or those offseason trades that were made, right? So we'll see what plays out there. That bummer trade is right. Like all the guys on the major league team. I mean, Schuster's actually looked pretty good this week. So that was cool to see. Schuster's been playing a relief role for the White Sox, Jared Schuster, and has looked pretty solid actually out of the bullpen for Chicago. So that's cool to see Jared Schuster kind of creating a bullpen role. But meanwhile, Mike Soroka, Nicky Lopez, Braden Shoemake really have not done much. So it's looking now like Gowens might end up being, funny enough, the kind of the key piece from that trade, hypothetically, if he continues to trend the direction he's trending right now. But yeah, that's cool to check in with some of those trades so far this season.
Yeah, and let's keep our fingers crossed that they can flip Schuster, that he pitches well enough that someone takes an interest in him at the deadline.
Wouldn't be a bad idea as well. And he's still pretty young, so you never know, they might keep him around too.
Yep.
But that sounds great. That I think will do it for this week of the Roundup. We touched on a lot of different things. We're a little all over the place, but we hope that everybody enjoyed the show, and we're hoping kind of these next few weeks we're going to potentially have some guests on, and we'll continue to bring you updates about the White Sox farm system every week right here. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Elijah.